So we're live streaming now, team. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Strategy and Operations meeting, first meeting of the year for the 18th of February. Nice to be back in our normal format and not stretched out all across the room. And I would also like to welcome our new Waikanai Community Board member, Mr. Mansell Richard. Welcome to the table. Look forward to working with you. And as I said, if you've got any questions throughout the meeting, just ask. With that, I'm going to move to item number 2, which is the Council Blessing, and Councillor Holbrook is going to read that out.
Ia mātou e whiriwhiri ana I ngā take ki mua I o mātou aroaro. E pono ana mātou ka kaha tonu ki te whakapau mahara huapai mō ngā hapori e mahi ne mātou. Me kaha hoki mātou katoa ki whaihua, kia tō tika ta mātou mahi. A matamaia te tiru whakamua me te hihiri, ka taia te arahi I te roto I te kotahitanga me te aroha.
Thank you, Janet. Move to item number 3, which is apologies, and we have apologies for lateness from Councillor Elliott. I'm not aware of any other apologies for the meeting. Tanika, there was no one else that came through? Okay, so if we could note that, I'd no need to move that one for lateness. Move on to item number 4, declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda. Again, I'm not aware of any none being brought to my attention. Quick look around the table. No one's jumping up and down. No. And so we move on to item number 6, which is members' business. There is no public speaking, there is no one here today for public speaking. So there's no responses. Any leave of absence? No. Item 6C, any matters of an urgent nature, none have been noted to me as chair, and so with that we're going to move on to item number 7, updates. And no, so sorry, I'll just... So team, look, item number 7.1, which is the outcomes from the Business Accelerator sessions, has been moved to another meeting. And so we're just going to park that one and move on to item number 8.1, which is the Policy Work Program update, and just invite staff to the table to speak to the report. I hope I didn't get this wrong. It's Aston and Hamish. Welcome. And just let you guys introduce the report.
Morena, Mr. Chair, Mayor, Councillors. The report we're going to discuss this morning is the Policy Work Program update, which you should be quite familiar with now. It provides an update on a range of the major policy projects we have programmed across a 3-year period. We last had a report update to you back in November 19, so this is provides a bit of the purview of the kind of action that's happened since then. So just to kind of provide a bit of indication of what's actually gone on since then, is we've had 4 we've had 4 policy projects completed since November 19 with the psychoactive substances, which I think we discussed and agreed or approved with you at the last meeting in November. But since then, we've also had another significant projects in the solid waste minimisation bylaw and the regional transport strategy, which you discussed the other week, also completed, alongside the last MPS UD annual monitoring report late last year. The report also provides a bit of a coverage of some of the projects that are underway and a number of projects which are underway with delays. A couple in there are also, it's important to identify, relate to some of the ongoing pressures around the delivery and focus on the beach bylaw, which has led to some of the delayed action and timeframes around a couple of the other bylaw projects that we have programmed in the schedule. It's also noteworthy just to flag one of the projects in there is looking to get underway again after being on hold, and that's the subdivision principles and requirements piece of work. Lastly, the report also provides a bit of coverage of some of those projects that are on hold, and a number of those there's a number of projects that have been additionally added to that and timeframes moved out, just noting some of the ongoing pressures around resourcing and timeframes to deliver those projects. The last thing I just wanted to bring attention to was the discussion that we had at the last meeting in November around the freedom camping policy and its addition to the policy work program. And that in reflection of some of those ongoing pressures, we've proposed as part of the work going forward and as part of the work program that we pick up and discuss that piece of work as part of the wider work program that we're looking to agree with you post-June this year and agree that work program for the next 3 years going forward at that stage. So otherwise, take the report as read and happy to answer any questions.
All right, team, so I'm going to open it up for questions, but before I do, I just want to remind you, it has come up from elected members around, I think we refer to it as the moving goalpost, where council will say they're going to do something and have it completed by a certain date, and then we get a bit upset because it isn't. If you look at the tables in there, it shows some examples of that where you have the current status, the previous completion date. I'm referring to page 9, and then it shows the new completion date. So just given that we've raised it and we've had concerns about it, I want to just draw attention to the fact that it is highlighted to elected members, and this is the occasion where you can see that. So for example, the traffic bylaw, the previous completion date was July, new completion date is now October, and reasons in that there, and people can ask questions if they have any. So Councillor Randall, first cab off the rank.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. In fact, that's what I was going to raise, a concern. Now, the positive ageing strategy review, I'm very concerned that the completion date was supposed to be April, and now it's moved back to December. Is it likely to be completed? I know you can't give an absolute guarantee, but is it likely to be completed in December? Oh, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, elected members. Yes, Councillor Randall, I am confident that unless something else unexpected happens, we will be able to complete that strategy by December. There's a couple of things that have influenced the sort of ongoing changes in timing around that piece of work. The first being delays to the completion of the survey that other organisations have completed that is an input into that strategy, but also, and probably more problematic, the fact that the staff working on that project are also heavily involved, were heavily involved in the welfare response initially for COVID, and continue to be quite heavily involved in additional work in the community space as part of our recovery activity. But I have had a number of conversations with that team about this piece of work, and I am confident that the December date that they've landed on is realistic, unless we find a significant change in the COVID situation, which would provide some workload challenges for them.
Further follow-up?
Also, the LA local alcohol policy. I'm concerned that it says there you've held up work on that because of the beach bylaw. I would have thought the community would have been more interested in the local alcohol policy than the beach bylaw.
If I could just touch on Hamish, I'll come to you. My understanding is that the beach bylaw needs to meet a statutory timeframe, and that was mainly the reason. But Hamish, did you want to?
Nothing further to add.
All right, thank you. So, thank you, Bernie. Look, elected members, before I carry on to the next few questions, I just want to check with staff around the microphone system, because my worry is that people are getting bumped through queues by unpushing their button and then someone else pushing over the top. So do we need to change the way that we're doing things at all in terms of how we're used to? Because I note previously we had Councillor McCann, and then because he had to push his button off so that Councillor Randall could speak.
No, I pushed my button off, then Rob pushed his off.
Yeah, I noticed you jumped ahead then. So Tanika,
so it's actually ended up the same.
Are you managing that at your end? Okay. Not necessarily. What I'm looking for is the best way to move forward so people aren't getting upset that they're not getting their turn in the line because of the way that the microphones are performing. So
we have given you a bit of a handout. It is for once you've finished instead of pushing yourself off, you may need to quieten yourself. So the one with the three dots.
Oh, I see.
Without losing your space. There is a situation if we have the chair people on, we can only have one other person.
Sure, so I think that's what happened when Janice needed to talk. So team, look, what we need to do is push your button if you've got a question, and then leave it pushed, and then staff will respond.
So if you finish speaking,
Push the one with the three dots next to it, and then staff will respond.
as long as no chair people.
So we'll see how we go. I just want to make sure that we're not getting frustrated by the microphones. There's enough to deal with.
We'll just press it.
Let's see how we go, Gwen. All right, Councillor McCann, over to you. Question?
I'm unfortunately, Mr. Mayor, I'm not mute, but through you, the Chair. I just want to raise a couple of questions. I know that this will sound like a broken record. I've been asking about policy reviews around developer contributions, sort of the impact of the ratings review, whether that would have an impact on holding on to land. I'm just looking through the list. Are you comfortable, and it may be a question for Natasha, that there is enough scope within here for the number of policy reviews that are probably going to be required by the housing program? Or is this something that we have to look at a separate point, or do we just leave it parked on the table that, in my opinion, it looks like we're short of capacity? Am I correct to make that a question?
Do you think even draft doesn't do anything?
You have to repeat your question again now, Rob. Thank you. So there are a couple of things for things like that which aren't currently on the program. The best time for us to be considering them is when we review the forward work program for the following 3 years, and that's when we can look at what the priorities should be and whether there are new policy reviews that have come up that we want to prioritise over some existing things. There are some resource constraints in this area. We did seek an additional resource into the research and policy team. It was one of the things that we've had to push out in terms of keeping through the long-term plans process and keeping some of the rates rises to a minimum there. So we're trying to make those trade-offs as best as we can to make sure that we're getting the work done in a timely way, while also making sure we're working within the constraints we've got.
Thank you for that answer. So that effectively, Mr. Chair, I leave my concerns on the table that I don't believe that we're resourced in the policy area to do the type of work that I think will be coming up from the housing program. So I think councillors should be left with that real concern.
Thank you, Councillor. Forgive me if I should know, but the date in terms of which that review was for the wider work program that you referred to, Natasha?
We'll be starting that in the new financial year.
Councillor Pravanov.
Oh, there we are. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So thank you, staff. I just wanted to just to check. So the table on page 14. I know previously we've had a printout of that. I'm just wondering if we're going to have a nice big printout of that, because it's really good reference rather than having to dig through the agenda. Yes. Thank you.
We can provide you a hard copy if that's useful.
Yeah, I think probably all councillors might
drop them straight
appreciate
down
that.
after this.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, just first I wanted to acknowledge the point that Councillor McCann raised, and that was, I think, something that we were looking at in terms of the long-term plan, the resourcing that could help with that. So I think that's, really important, because as we experienced back in November, we've got priorities that we want to get addressed too, so it's important to acknowledge the resourcing in the team there. My question was about that, the 2021-24 work program. So obviously it was just mentioned that work's going to start in the new financial year. I'm just trying to understand the timing in terms of when that's going to come back to this committee, and presumably there'll be some sort of workshop with us ahead of it where we'll get to duke it out about our different priorities over the next 3 years. Yeah, correct. So just based on the last process that was followed, there was a number of workshops with councillors and also iwi involvement as well, to actually look at the range of those policy projects that could be on the table or are on the table. So just kind of like harking back to the schedule we've got in front of us. On the left-hand side of that, there's a number of categories, those that are which kind of like statutory requirements. Then there's some key driven ones, which are long-term plan commitments. And then obviously there's some other driven. And I guess that the timing is based on the fact that the LTP will then be concluded. It's quite clear what projects have been committed. And then we have a discussion typically to work through what those various timeframes, requirements and prioritisations are from yourselves and council to agree that work program going forward. So we envisage starting that process in July. Last time, I think it took, the work program was agreed in December, but I know there's a lot of familiarity now with a lot of the discussions and topics and processes, so I'm sure we can bring that forward a lot quicker. But there is quite a bit of time and dedication to that as a project, as it were, in and of itself. But that's very important because that sets the benchmark going, the baseline, I guess, for the next 3 years as a starting point anyway. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Councillor Holborough.
Thank you. The keeping of animals, bees and poultry bylaw, it says in paragraph 20 that it's due to be within 2 years with the extension 3rd of June 2022, and yet in the table on page 9, oh, it's July 2021. I was worried that we were breaching that time frame. We do tend to run quite close to the gauntlet though, in terms of, Councillor McCann's pointed out the housing policy, work program and the resourcing that's going to take. I'm more deeply concerned that we run the risk of breaching those statutory timeframes, which is really serious. And I wonder if the staff have thought about testing the council's appetite for increasing resourcing in this area through the long-term plan, or was there just an assumption made that that was going to be not appetising or appealing for governance?
So thank you, Councillor, and yes we did, and that was part of making sure that it wasn't a 21% rates increase. So as you heard from Natasha, that was one of the roles that was in the original consideration, but everything's a balancing act. And you've heard me say before, there isn't a single team at council that couldn't use more resources, whether it be lawn mowing or policy. So what I'm aware of is every single time that today's issue in front of you would do better with more resource, the first thing you ask for is, can we have more resource in this space? And I'm not looking at you specifically, Councillor, you've been around the table for many years and you know this. Every single policy option, every single lawn mowing option, every single iwi option, you name it, they could all do with more resources. And what we've done is consider, on balance, what we think is as good as we can do to balance affordability and rates increases with the work program. It is always in front of you to agree to more. And as Councillor Compton and the Chair had alluded to today, one of the things that we're bringing back is what are the few positions that few more resources might help us to work faster, and one of them would probably be this policy resource. That's still not going to get us anywhere. The government's work program, the fact that this table has voted in new things that aren't on the work program, is exactly what we push back against, because that makes our life really, really difficult. We agree a program for 3 years. It is really hard to change it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wayne. I just want to check with Councillor Holbrook if that's... Yeah, and Guru, was yours, Your Worship, a follow-up?
Yes, it is follow-up. I learn new things, eh? Just following on what the Chief Executive has said, with the local alcohol policy and the general bylaw policy being under threat of being deferred further, and I think the one on animals and bees and stuff. Those bylaws been deferred, because we certainly have this thing on freedom camping. I've been working quite closely with Councillor Elliott on this matter, but on the day that this was discussed, I think both the Chief Executive and myself were in a conference in Wellington. And the thing is, we have gone through training sessions and we've learned that, it's very difficult for you to dump things at the last moment in the work stream without alerting staff on it. And I know that the Chief Executive in his office, has his position as Chief Executive, can have the ability to say straight away, look, he doesn't have the resources to do it. Unfortunately, he wasn't there at that time to be able to say that. So I'm in that area, paragraph 15 that we're talking about. How do we, what is the intention of staff to enable the freedom camping policy to be discussed? Are we talking without deferring any of the other ones? And by underlying appeal to the councillors is to follow the strategy whereby you alert staff of what your intentions are, so that we don't get quagmired, or what is that a term that you use, isn't it? Clog up our arteries.
That's the one, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Yes, I just endorse what you're saying. There are many instances where elected members have come to us outside of meetings and said, this is an issue, can you give me some guidance on how and where that could come into the work program? And that's much easier for us to cope with. It won't be a very positive conversation. It'll always be about how far into the future we'll do it, unless it's something that has got a statutory deadline that's all of a sudden been imposed on us. But yes, totally endorse what you're saying. Please talk with staff. Be ready for some disappointment that things can't be dealt with immediately, but that way we can factor it in. Back to your first question, as Natasha said earlier, we propose that the freedom camping will be part of the July workshops and policy setting for the next 3-year term.
So, sorry, I'm just saying who is Mr. Jefferson. Did you have something to add?
Councillor Elliott, looking in my direction, I think she goes first. I might be able to respond. I don't want to anticipate all.
So before we do that, I did have Councillor Pravanov down next in terms of order. And I didn't have you down, Councillor Elliott, but I can see that you're trying. Pravanov, okay, so Councillor Elliott, I'm going to come to you, but I just don't want to get into a debate in terms of the topic. So I'm going to ask you a question and then just see if you've got a question. Are you happy with the response around the freedom camping policy being brought back in July? And then
I'm absolutely happy with that, and know that in the last few weeks that lead staff people have been assigned to this work.
Awesome.
And also the Mayor and CE may not be aware that this was preceded by over 8 months of discussion at group manager level on this, so I don't feel as though I hadn't given anyone a heads up to a slow but keen progression.
Councillor Elliott,
the
Chief Executive just wants to respond.
And my understanding of all of those conversations was we explained to you why it didn't need to be on the work program. It was not an issue and not a priority for Kapiti. And so by bringing it to the table and getting it voted on in spite of those conversations, puts us in the same position as if we'd never had the conversation. Okay.
Councillor Elliott, did you have a question to ask? Sorry, I'll come to you, Councillor Randall. Councillor Elliott, can I just check first? Yeah. You're done?
Yeah.
Not in terms of a debate. Sorry, I'm just... Yeah, but not in the middle of a councillor was asking a question. So, Councillor Randall, point of order. What your point of order?
Point of order 25.2F. I request the wording that any councillors should be able to bring any matters before the council to have voted on, notwithstanding what the Chief Executive had just said. So I just want to have my view. In other words, I'm disagreeing with what the Chief Executive has said.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think what I heard the Chief Executive say was that it's not that we can't, but that it puts pressure on the organisation if the resources aren't there. So noted. Who have I got next on the screen? I haven't got any other. Councillor Holborough.
That's
Councillor.
me.
And can I just check first? I'm not trying to stop you here about questions because I don't want, we're starting to get into a little bit of debate. Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Pravanov?
Thank you. So just clarification. So going back to 14, where you've got the table there, I'm just trying to understand whether everything that's on that chart is noted higher up in the report, because I see that there's another policy called road naming and street numbering policy, but that's actually not, I couldn't see it in the main body of the report. I'm just wondering if there's a good reason why it's not included and whether there's other ones that aren't included as well, so we can just sort of understand how they fit into the whole work program.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, it's a bit remiss of me when I was describing the actual report itself. A very important category in there that I overlooked was those current policy projects in progress with no concerns. And so, of course, the report on page 8 also identifies that there's 22 other policy projects. So those are the colours again coming to the graphic on page 14 kind of denote where they sit within those categories in the report. Blues are completed, greens are underway within showing specific timeframes that we're currently working to. Oranges are the ones that are underway with some delays, and so that's that table we referred to earlier, and then the rose coloured are the ones that are currently on hold.
So what that really means is there's an awful lot of work in the program. Thank you.
Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Look, just wanted some clarity, actually, nothing too major, on the destination plan. I know we've received a lot of funding, well, a lot of the funding's come through the regional council with regards to a regional plan. And I was just checking the destination plan. I gather we're feeding into a regional policy, but this is a policy for us locally as well. Is that correct? Sorry.
Yes, so there is work that's being done. The work is being done locally and it's being coordinated regionally. So the work we're getting done is looking specifically at our area to develop a destination management plan. That will then get compiled up and feed into the regional destination management plan.
I guess again clarifying, there'll also be a specific plan that we have for ourselves as a destination plan, not tied directly into the regional plan. I know we'll be part of that, but we'll have our own plan as well. Is that correct?
Yes, there will be both a local plan, which is complementary and relates to the regional plan. So they are together and linked, but also it's a specific local plan.
Thank you very much.
I'm fine for asking the question. I think Councillor Buswell saying there was a briefing where that was, and I'm not sure you're at that, just to say that everyone's aware it was sort of talked through. Your Worship, the Mayor.
Is it on? Yes, it is. Just on the general bylaw, is it correct that my understanding is that the general bylaw is a bylaw for all bylaws? So it is an enabler for all the other bylaws. So if I'm correct, does that mean we shouldn't be deferring that? Because it underpins all the other bylaws?
My understanding of the general bylaw, and I've only had a cursory look, is that it provides some background processes that support the compliance and enforcement and wider regulatory arrangements that support across the bylaws. And it's something that we've got to scope, but obviously it kind of underlies some of the powers and some of the abilities to act and enable across bylaws, is my understanding. But we'll come back, so it's obviously quite important. But we've got time. We're planning to start scoping that pretty quickly. It's quite a technical piece of work. It's not something that necessarily, it's a process kind of driven piece of work from my understanding. So it's not something that affects specific subject matters outside more widely, but more around how the mechanisms of the bylaws are undertaken and kind of implemented.
So my can happen is that when it is challenged, the lawyers can use the due process mistakes to undermine the case. I mean, that's my concern.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had a few questions myself, and then we'll move to the recommendations. I've got no other one signalling questions. The animal, bees and poultry bylaw that's been raised a couple of times already, I know nothing about it. But one thing that we have raised before as a council is whether we can just pick up some of those more, and I'm saying simple, I don't know if it is, from other councils around the country. I used the Easter trading one as an example where we managed to knock that out in 6 weeks. Is that an example where we could potentially put a whole lot of work into duplicating something that another council has around the country?
We already do have a one in place, so it is a review of an existing. But again, the scope and scale of that, I think, is far more manageable, and I might touch wood, in regards to something like the beach bylaw, which is, so it's kind of specifically looking at some very specific uses and how they're managed, and that sits alongside other means of managing the same subject matter area under the district plan or through the Welfare Act itself.
Thank you. The next one is regarding the number 7 on the table on page 9, Subdivision Development Principles and Requirements Review. How does that fit into the housing program?
So this is it's a very it's a technical document that sets out engineering specifications and requirements, and it is what relates to all subdivisions. Developers need to comply with the SDPR. So any of the work that's done under the housing program where it's actually about building more houses will need to comply with that document.
Okay, thank you. The next one is around the my favourite one, the encroachment policy. We've raised, obviously, over the years, the I guess the number of encroachments across the district, and I guess the benefits to the ratepayer that could come from dealing with some of those. Is that something that I see there that work has not yet begun due to lack of resourcing? Is that something that's worthwhile bringing through the LTP if we are to sell off parcels of land or lease them as part of the encroachment policy?
Up to that last bit, there's I get a wee disconnect on that last comment you made, because we don't, through the work we have done, we've pretty much completed the land audit, looking at what we've got, and through that, as we've mentioned a few times, we haven't really identified surplus land. There are a few exceptions, and we've worked through some of them, but very few. We don't hold much. In terms of the encroachments overall, it is probably more about the value where people have started using the land in front of their houses, whether that be on a roadside or even on a beachfront, actually. Somebody might have a swimming pool on our land.
Yeah, that's the example I'm thinking of, half a swimming pool on council land. So.
We're still not in a position, and we do keep pushing it down the line because of the size of this other work program for those people who are involved in it. And I'm acutely aware that we've been talking like this for about 6 years. It is really hard until we can do a little bit more work to look at the possible costs and benefits to know whether there's a lot at stake here or very little.
Sure.
I do know that for the infrastructure team, they would really like some work done on the encroachment policy sides because of people asking for exceptions or whatever, or us being able to impose a cost on the use of that land. So yes, there is value. Again, it just comes down to us prioritising it downwards. If you want to bring it forward through that, absolutely.
I guess the only reason why myself and previously other councillors and previous trainees had raised it was if there was the potential for the work to ultimately pay for itself through some of those encroachments. And in the example that we've always used is that swimming pool that's half on council reserve or land or whatever. So, I think from memory there was examples there where a lease agreement might be entered into with the property owner in lieu of the land that they're using without permission. Complicated?
Yeah, because you know how it's going to land, right? That's the issue, really. All this long-standing, it's probably not appropriate to call it squatters' rights, but, long-standing arrangements that are in place are going to land really badly when we say, by the way, you're on our land and you need to pay. History would tell me that someone around this table will be lobbied by a member of their community saying this is really unfair, and you'll come to us and say this is really unfair, please don't do it in this instance, and you'll go there's a policy. And so I'm not even sure, I'm really not sure whether there will be net benefit.
If it's worth it. Okay.
That said, those are the reasons. You're absolutely talking about the reasons that we need to consider, and they haven't gone away, I guess is all I can say.
Okay, thanks Wayne, and noted the comments. The last one I had was around the local alcohol policy, and so if I've read the paper correctly, my understanding is that is being considered to resume in April around the timing after the beach bylaw, and that Councillor Elliott's one that she's bought hasn't been dropped off the list. That's going to be part of that wider review through July, which it sounds like she's aware of. So, all right, team. So I think we've done that one to death. Have we got anyone that wants to move the recommendations on page 12? Councillor Compton, seconded by Councillor Holborough. That's all the recommendations, just so that we're not moving too fast, on page 12 and 13 from 25 through to 28. Let's open that up for debate. I'm a little bit rusty for the first meeting of the year. I'm going to write of introduction first, and then I'll open it up for debate. Councillor Compton.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to thank staff for their work and their ongoing work across the policy work program. It's obviously hugely complicated stuff you're dealing with, and often changing legislative requirements coming down from central government. And as we all know, there's a tsunami of change coming our way. And I also acknowledge the Chief Executive's comments around us not clogging up the arteries. And that's why in those long-term plan workshops I'd raised the question about how can we get more resource. And I fully appreciate that's not going to enable us to perform heart bypass surgery on it, but it'll at least let us insert a stent to try and keep it, somewhat flowing. So I mainly just want to encourage councillors to keep that in their minds when it comes to us having those discussions, because we can see from this the massive workload that is in front of council officers, and with us wanting and needing to do more to help our community and the government requiring us to do more, we need to be, I would think, very realistic about ensuring that we resource that, bearing in mind the affordability concerns, which the CEO also raised. So it's always difficult to find that balance, but I think, we do need to ensure that there is more resourcing there to so that we don't end up in situations where stuff that needs to be addressed actually drops off and we end up in digging ourselves further into a hole in this.
Councillor Elliott.
Thanks. Look, I'd just like to make it clear that I've been completely aware for many, many months work with staff that the writing of a freedom camping bylaw is an extremely big piece of work with lots and lots of public consultation. Hence, on advice of staff, making space for a wee tweaking of the existing policy was an option that was far more palatable at the time. I'm sorry you and Mayor and CEO weren't here for that discussion. Far smaller piece of work.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor McCann.
In an effort to carry on Councillor Compton's analogy, I'd like to thank the staff for keeping this process going, and just remind all of the councillors that the housing continuum is on life support, and one of the ways in which we can ensure that that small beating heart of hope for people to buy houses in our environment is that we may need more resources in this policy space, because it's quite clear to me that what has worked in the past is not working now. We need to look at new solutions. So some of that must require policy work and looking at things that previously we may have rejected. But thank you to the staff for all the work that's going on in this space. And finally, just I'm really happy to see that the local alcohol policy is on there. I think it's really important for our communities to be able to consider whether we need a ceiling or a sinking lid, and I'm glad to see that that policy is going to be looked at. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Clearly the housing topic is close to your heart. That one. Oh, come on now, that was a good one.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said
You want the bypass.
Your worship, the Mayor.
I just want to pick up on Councillor Elliott's. In my conversations with her, I think her intention was the need for policy and strategic thinking to be agile, because it was a reaction to the COVID and the economic impact of that and the need to attract more tourists here from this particular area. There was some urgency. My reading of that was there's some urgency around this to increase our ability to attract a particular clientele, and I can understand that.
Thank you. Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So I just actually wanted to pick up on Councillor Elliott's point as well, because I just in her comments just recently, she mentioned both the policy and a bylaw. They're actually very, very different documents, and it's my understanding. So a policy's got into the working program, but it's my understanding that it's a bylaw that is what would enable those groups to come to Kapiti, not a policy. A policy has no teeth. A bylaw does.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not going to get into a tit-for-tat, Councillor Elliott. You can have a chat to Councillor Pravanov in the break.
Yeah,
I think what we've got is in front of us on the paper, and that's what we're proceeding with. Councillor Compton, have you got a right of reply? It's waived. So I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. And just thank you, staff, for the work that you've done. Hamish, how many people in the policy team?
4, including myself.
And the other work that you do other than just policy? Because it'll be around, it's not just
full... Well, policy work, I also hold.
To get Wainui Whenua.
Oh, yeah. I'm working with some community groups on the side.
And Wainui Whenua. So look, just to give you a little bit of a grasp of the size of the team and the size of the work that they have to carry. So thank you both. I'm just going to see what we've got. Next one. Yeah, that's what I thought. National. Yeah. Excellent.
The meeting brought to you by Hamish.
Yeah. So look, I'll just move straight on to the next item on the agenda, and Hamish is going to speak to the Aston, to the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. So over to you, Aston.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Mayor and Councillors. You have in front of you the second quarterly monitoring report, which is a part of our quarterly monitoring requirements under the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. This report includes an update on our consent activity and the key indicators which were updated and published on the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development's dashboard for the period of the 1st of September until the 30th of November. This report shows that the resource and building consent activity has increased from the previous quarter, along with the total value of work for building consents and the potential for net additional dwellings also increasing. However, when we compare this to the same quarter last year, both resource and building consent activity has decreased slightly. We can't be sure, but we could reasonably assume that the coronavirus pandemic may have contributed to this. Following the last quarterly update, interest and demand for housing in Kapiti has remained strong. Housing sales have bounced back after lockdown from 242 to 406 for the reporting period, and the median sales price has continued to reach record highs, hitting $730,000 for the end of September. This high demand and pressure is reflected nationally as demand and house prices are increasing at record levels across the country. There is some discussion and debate over the driver of this demand. LVRs were removed by the Reserve Bank, which has provided an opportunity for a greater number of buyers to get into the housing market. More recently, a number of leading bank commentators are identifying the low mortgage rates as the key driver, and that house prices and values will plateau and potentially fall on the back of future interest rate increases. I will now take the report as read and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Aston. Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, just a couple of questions from me. First of all, do we adjust the building value for inflation over the longer term so that you're able to make comparisons? Because obviously there'll be movement in building costs over the longer term. But if we're just using that net present value, the value at that time, then it's a bit harder to make that comparison about what the value of work was.
That's a very good question. We currently use the information that's provided through from the building consent processes that's reported through to statistics, who then formally put it out. So we'll have to actually look into that. But I know, I guess there'll be some level of consistency within timeframes that we're talking about. So from quarter to quarter, we can reliably say and compare the dollar values. But it'll be quite interesting exercise if we were to take data from 10 years ago versus current prices. So we can look into that and can come back to you at the next update.
Cool, because I know that, that statistics does have a building price inflation index, but it's a question of whether or not they factor it in there. My second question was, in terms of the longer term housing and business capacity assessment, when is our next sort of big one of those due? And given that we did the last one in conjunction with the rest of the region, is there a statutory timeframe on when we have to do it, or are we able to wait until, say, Wellington's gone through its spatial plan and we've gone through the new requirements of the MPS on urban development? Because it seems that if we had to do it before those happened, we'll get one figure in terms of feasible development, and then suddenly those changes will come, and then we'd have to do it all again to actually understand what the new picture is.
You've hit it on the head. We're currently working, we've the regional group, the last HBA I should start with, was completed in 2019, and there was a requirement to repeat it every 3 years. The MPSUD that came out last year in August requires councils, the Wellington councils, I'll just focus on us, and that's the collective urban Wellington councils, the Huts, Wellington City, Porirua and ourselves, to complete an HBA for housing components, not the business side of it, housing only, by July this year. So currently the councils are working together to repeat the process that we'd only recently completed and to rerun our analysis. That will take into account updated figures relating to obviously land price increases and any other relevant changes around planning frameworks. For us, that's quite limited because we haven't yet had significant planning changes, but they are coming forward in that rolling plan review. So we'll come back to you and brief you on what that looks like as we redo the calculations and work with the other councils. But the next requirement following that is to have the next housing business assessment fulsomely, both housing and business, to be completed in time to inform the next LTP in 2024. So we will be looking to repeat the HBA process, most likely after we've undertaken some of those plan changes to give effect to the MPSUD, in time to inform the next LTP. So it is a bit of a repetitious but ongoing continuous process.
Perfect, thank you. Yep, no, that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Your Worship, the Mayor.
I'm looking at paragraph 13 of your report. It gives the indication that the monitoring under the National Policy Statement on Urban Development supports Council's ability to adapt and respond to evidence for urban development, market, particularly social, economic and cultural, environmental well-being of people in the communities. And I'm sure Councillor McCann, holding the housing portfolio, would agree with me to this question as to whether it does actually provide the necessary evidence for us to lock in to an evidence-based response that we do not have enough houses, there is hidden demand, there is homelessness, and therefore it is not adequate. So the question is, is the evidence base adequate? Is the methodology being used by us? So where is the gap?
Chief Executive.
What gets measured gets managed, and I would say that I have seen a significant change in attitude both around the region and with the people we interact with once they start to see this evidence. Because it is interesting, isn't it, that based on admittedly conservative growth forecasts from the old HBA, we have 25 years worth of housing supply feasible. So where is it? And so that changes the emphasis of our question. Why aren't people making it happen? And as you know, the conversation that we're putting into the mix is, well, if that feasible development is not happening, we actually need to respond in a different way. So I would say to you that, yes, the evidence and the way this has been required to be delivered has helped a lot, but the time spans that we've got to work within to make those changes happen are very long and very slow.
Even we are taking national policy statement, but the way the MSD and the government agencies use their evidence is different in terms of delivery. And therefore there's a gap.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So really, if you're referencing things like the most desperate end of the spectrum, the affordability, the need for more social housing, and the fact that the likes of MSD think Kapiti needs 40 houses and Kaingaora are prepared to build 13, then I agree with you. They are not yet seeing things the way we are, and that is, of course, why the housing needs assessment is a priority piece of work. Anecdotally, we believe we need 300 houses. We need more evidence behind that, so that's why that work is important.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a second question, but if there's any follow-up by anybody else, I'm willing to wait. My second question goes on to page 4 of your report of the, on the building consents, does the interpretation of your data give any indication of the capacity of our building sector workforce to deliver? And how does that equation fit into this?
No, we don't have indicators that actually reflect that, and I think it comes back to the Chief Executive's comments before about the housing business assessment can identify capacity and what's out there, but there's a gap with understanding about how, and that's a big how and a wide how, with many different potential partners and others involved in a discussion about how that can then be enabled.
Councillor Elliott, you've inadvertently jumped the queue. Can I get you just to push your button, and then Councillor McCann, and then it'll be Councillor Elliott.
Sorry, Councillor Elliott. Thank you. Mayor Guru has covered some of the things that I was going to ask. So I'll start off somewhere differently. I did note in that report back to us, you noted that experts believe that house prices will plateau. What I'm curious is, do staff actually agree with that recommendation? If so, why or why not? Not recommendation, but that assumption.
I think that was just a commentary, a capture of the commentary that's currently been available. I think there was an interesting bit of information alongside that with last year as a response to stimulus on the back of the COVID impacts and lockdown, the LVRs were removed and reduced. Governments, the Reserve Bank or government, I think, is now looking to actually put those back in place to kind of help address and kind of manage some of that heat in the housing market that's been created, which is actually pushing the pressures on local housing further, maybe not as anticipated.
So, just to follow up.
I'll just add, Councillor, if I may. No. Your question was, did staff agree?
Right, so we know that staff via the mayor, the CE, don't agree. But yeah, I did want to just push down into that a little bit further. With the potential for interest rates going up for some purchases, does staff think and given the way in which it's likely to work, gazing into a crystal ball, is that property investors might be having to stump up more, and first-time homeowners might still have current access to funds. Does the increase in prices mean that you would think that that particular market, those particular people are going to be able to continue to purchase, or do you think that will help stall the market that, first-time owners are not going to be able to get in? So very poor question.
Couldn't really comment on that because that is crystal ball gazing. All I could correlate is, I guess, is a basic logic that while housing prices continue to rise, those who can marginally afford them to start with will be more challenged to be able to afford them as they increase further, unless something changes.
Thank you. I'll save all my other comments for debate.
Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you. Just something brief. Can I possibly have 2 hard copies of the actual report? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you. Just quickly a comment. On the map on page 9, question has been asked previously about where Waikanae West is. It shows you where it is. And also, if you just go back to the tables on page 7 and 8, I see that a lot of the net dwelling increases and the resource consents are occurring in Waikanae. I'm just wondering what is actually driving that, please, if you know.
Currently, Waikanae contains a number of the largest sites of development going on. So there's a range of large individual sites that have been in process for a number of years. So on the back of, there's Koikoui up on the hill that has been subdivided, which is a number of lots. And then we've got Manu Park, I believe it is, as well as a range of other projects coming online in and around that area as well. And that's a couple of the significant greenfield developments have been in those areas for a number of years, and Narara as well, a bit further down towards the beach area.
So is that trend going to continue? Of Waikanae being the area where a lot of these consents and buildings are
it has been
buildings.
The strong focus of recent years, but Otaki has quite recently been bringing on stronger numbers as a lot of infill and obviously increasing demand and probably speculation around transmission gully and opportunities, but also the price rises and value for money pushing further north, which has also had an impact. I think we've heard before at the table about some of the pressures obviously forcing people, but then there's opportunities for others as well with some of those dynamics at play.
Thank you.
Councillor Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following on from Councillor Pravanov, is there any program of works to improve or bring forward a lot of works in Waikanae to improve the footpaths and roading, which some of them are quite old?
Councillor, it's probably not the right team to answer that question, but we will look to get someone to respond to you offline during the course of today if Sean or someone's around. I don't think Hamish and Aston know the answer to that one, and I can't see that Sean's in the room either. So can we come back to you on that one? Thanks, Councillor. And Councillor Pravanov would like to know as well. What I do know holding the portfolio is there is a footpath program. Look, I'll briefly answer to that because I know that it was raised on social media. Just bear with me quickly. The 2017-2018 budget for footpath renewals was $224,000, and in 2018-2019 the budget was $638,000. So you'll notice a significant jump there, and that was due to the government's increased funding around their priorities, and so council has matched that, essentially doubling the footpath work program. It then goes to $819,000 in 1920 and just under $1 million in 2021. So what that tells you is that the footpath program has gone from $224,000 in 17-18 to $1 million. So there's a lot more work being done in that space, and the footpath program itself has a listed priority list from worst to best, renewals, and obviously new footpaths as well. But we can take that offline if you've got any further questions from there, because it's not really relating to this paper. Councillor Pravanov?
Actually, I was just going to say that those figures relate to the whole district, not specifically to
Yeah,
Waikato.
that is correct.
Yeah, thank you.
And so that's renewals and I'll come back to you around new ones, because I think that might be slightly outside of that. And actually, just noting as well, we have 431 kilometres of footpaths and shared paths within the district, so it's quite an extensive network. I don't see any further questions. Councillor McCann, would you like to move the recommendations? I just bring up the page, found on page
Certainly.
18, right of introduction.
Oh, thank you very much,
Sorry.
Chair.
Seconded by Councillor Holborough, and then right of introduction.
Look, I'd like to commend the staff on the work that they're doing, and while I might sound like a broken record about housing, all of these measurements are really, really useful to be able to help paint a picture. What's quite clear, and the staff acknowledge this, is that it doesn't paint the full picture, and I think that was what the Mayor was alluding to, which is why all councillors have so far agreed to the housing needs assessment, housing and social needs assessment, which begins to paint a fuller picture. And I can say to councillors that at meeting with Kāinga Ora, they acknowledged one of the things that I'd stated in public is that when you don't have any houses to let, nobody actually asked to go on that list. So we have some huge need out there, which this report doesn't really cover. And it is really good to see that there is a whole bunch of work within council that looks at the continuum of housing. And I certainly think this report enables us to look at one part of that continuum. What it doesn't allow us to do is work out what part of the continuum that it's actually supporting, whether it's that first end emergency housing or low-cost housing rather than the other end. So it helps us paint a picture. It's one part of the information that we require to make decisions. And so I'm really confident that the council is doing everything they can to make sure that we inform the work as we go on. So I'd just like to commend you on the work that you've done.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Compton. All right, I don't see any further names down for debate, so I'm going to put that to the vote. Right of reply.
I apologise for not including a metaphor about health and hospitals.
So I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against. Carried. Look, I'm not going to break for a toilet break, team, because we've just got the minutes to go. So if you can bear with us, we'll just move on to... before that, thank you, Aston and Hamish, for the work that you guys do. And so, team, we are now moving on to item number 9.1, found on page 26, confirmation of minutes. And we have the minutes there from the 3rd of September and the 3rd of December. We take those both together unless there's any objections. Is there anything raised out of the minutes that's been attributed to you that you don't think should have been? Otherwise, I'll look for someone to move the minutes. Councillor Randall, you signalling to move the minutes? You want a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Buswell. Any further discussion? Right, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, and carried. And if I flick back through, I think no public speaking and no excluded minutes. So I'm going to call the meeting to a close, and I thank you all for your participation and for staff's input. Thank you.